Muy buenas tardes a todos y todas. En nombre de Docentia del Centro de
María José,
Innovación,
unos 2 minutos y partimos para que ingrese la gente bien a la sala. Listo.
estamos admitiendo a los participantes antes de iniciar nuestra sesión del día de hoy, que es la charla magistral que dictará el doctor Michael Graham Moore, titulada La tecnología digital como un apoyo a la enseñanza. Bueno, demos inicio entonces a esta sesión. Muy buenas tardes. En nombre de Docentia, Centro de Innovación y Desarrollo Docente, les damos la más cordial bienvenida a los académicos y a las académicas de nuestra universidad, como así también a los participantes de otras instituciones de educación superior que se unen a este evento. Los micrófonos permanecerán silenciados durante la sesión y al finalizar esta presentación habrá un espacio de preguntas y respuestas de 10 minutos aproximadamente, por lo que les sugerimos e invitamos a escribir sus preguntas en el chat. Atendiendo a la política de equidad de género, diversidad e inclusión de la Universidad Autónoma de Chile, esta charla además cumple con opciones de accesibilidad. Es por ello que hoy nos acompañará en la interpretación de lengua de señas Mildred Reyes Solari. Este evento también será interpretado en español por Valentina Góngora, por lo que tienen la posibilidad de seleccionar el idioma en el que quieran escuchar la charla, ya sea inglés o español. Para ello deben usar la aplicación de Teams. Por el chat se enviaron las instrucciones a través de una infografía para que la puedan revisar, pero también les vamos a dar las instrucciones de forma oral. Deben hacer clic en los 3 botones en el icono más que se ubica en la parte superior derecha de sus pantallas. Se va a desplegar una lista con 2 opciones y se debe seleccionar la opción Interpretación lingüística y luego el idioma deseado, ya sea inglés o español. Antes de iniciar la charla magistral, se dirige a ustedes Patricia Ibáñez, directora de Desarrollo Docente de nuestra universidad.
Hola, buenas tardes a todos y todas. Espero que esta jornada sea hoy día de provecho para todos ustedes. Contarles que esta charla magistral se desarrolla bajo el contexto de los procesos de formación docente de la universidad, de la Vicerrectoría Académica y específicamente del Centro de Innovación y Desarrollo Docente. Consideramos que los procesos formativos de los docentes resultan clave en las prácticas pedagógicas, resultan clave para el impacto que podrían tener en nuestros estudiantes. Es por ello que hemos desplegado una serie de cursos y de iniciativas que van en función y beneficio de todos nuestros académicos y nuestros docentes de la universidad. Es por ello que hoy día tenemos invitado a Dr. Moore, quien los va a acompañar con una charla que tiene que ver con los procesos de educación en línea. Así que los voy a dejar con ellos. Bienvenidos nuevamente y estamos muy contentos de que puedan tener hoy día una participación con nosotros.
Agradecemos las palabras de nuestra directora, Patricia Ibáñez Polanco. Bueno, tal como comentó Patricia, el expositor de hoy es el doctor Michael Graham Moore, profesor emérito de Penn State University y editor del American Journal of Distance Education. Dr. Moore es internacionalmente reconocido por sentar las bases de la educación a distancia, actualmente conocida como e-learning o aprendizaje en línea. En 1972 creó la teoría sobre educación a distancia, conocida como teoría transaccional. Dr. Moore es merecedor de muchos primeros en su disciplina. En la década del 70 enseñó el primer curso sobre educación a distancia en la Universidad Wisconsin-Madison en Estados Unidos y organizó la Conferencia Anual Nacional sobre Educación a Distancia en esa misma casa de estudios. En 1986 se une a Penn State University, donde crea el American Center for Study of Distance Education. Diseña los primeros cursos de posgrado, una de las primeras redes sociales en línea llamada Distance Education Online Symposium y la primera revista de investigación sobre educación a distancia, The American Journal of Distance Education. Su bestseller, Handbook of Distance Education, con 4 ediciones ya publicadas, y Distance Education Assistant View, traducido a 5 idiomas. Ha dado charlas en más de 55 países y se ha desempeñado como consultor para distintos organismos internacionales, tales como el Fondo Monetario Internacional, la UNESCO, el Banco Mundial y la Agencia de las Naciones Unidas para los Refugiados. Finalmente, podemos mencionar que ha sido distinguido como doctor honoris causa por su gran contribución a la educación a distancia por la Universidad de Wisconsin-Madison en Estados Unidos, Athabasca University en Canadá, la Universidad de Guadalajara en México y también por la Universidad de El Salvador en Buenos Aires, Argentina. Entonces, con esta introducción, damos la más cordial bienvenida al Dr. Michael Graham Moore con la charla magistral titulada La tecnología digital como un apoyo a la enseñanza. Dr. Moore, now I will be passing on.
Okay, thank you, Maria. I think you probably read most of my resume there. Thank you for that introduction. And thank you to the Autonomous University of Chile for including me in this celebration of the opening of your professional training program. I understand it will begin probably in August, and this is to celebrate the establishment of your professional training program. There's a movement around the world of universities setting up programs to train their faculty. Not before time, I might say. I've often thought it rather unsatisfactory that in every other profession, professional training is expected, but to teach in higher education, there is no professional training. That's changing around the world, and I should congratulate you who are going to take the course, and your university for being among the leaders in this movement to develop the professional training of those who are teaching in higher education. What pushed so many universities to finally recognize the need for professional development was, of course, their experience during the COVID epidemic, when schools and universities all around the world decided they had to teach at a distance, using digital technology, mostly using real-time video, such as we're doing today, supported perhaps by internet. They found this was much more difficult than they expected and not very satisfactory. I was quite disappointed watching the news here in the United States when university administrators, presidents would come on to the evening news and talk about how much they were hoping to get back to the real thing, to get back to real teaching, by which they meant teaching in the classroom. And they were right to be critical of what happened, the quality of what they experienced in their efforts to deal with the challenges at that time of the COVID epidemic. Valentina, am I being heard okay?
Dr. Moore?
Yes.
Is Marie Jose. And there is some problem with the interpreting mode, so we're going to fix that. So as soon as we are done with that, we're going to get back to you again.
And we'll start from the beginning.
And yeah, so we will fix it in a couple of seconds. So I will let you know.
Okay.
Estamos teniendo un pequeño problema con el modo de interpretación. Por lo tanto, vamos
María
a
José.
arreglar ese impasse y les avisaremos tan pronto lo podamos arreglar.
María José,
Dime,
¿me
Claudia.
escuchas?
Sí.
Sí, es que hay mucha gente que tiene el perfil para poder editar y pido que solamente nos deje a nosotros, por favor, el poner intérprete a Valentina, por favor, porque como tenemos correos corporativos pueden acceder a esta administración. Entonces yo ahora voy a poner a Valentina como intérprete para que podamos poder escuchar en español.
Bueno, por favor, seguid las indicaciones de Claudia, que nos comenta que solamente ella va a poder hacer clic en el modo de interpretación en el idioma que queremos escucharlo. Entonces, una vez que esté seleccionado ese modo, van a poder escuchar la interpretación de Valentina. Muchas gracias por su paciencia y comprensión.
María José. Valentina, si me escuchas, por favor,
Sí.
te voy a sacar de la reunión y te voy a volver a llamar porque no sé qué pasa, que queda como en un loop y no me deja habilitar el español. Por favor.
Agradecemos su paciencia y comprensión. Claudia está resolviendo el problema para que puedan escuchar la sesión en idioma español.
María José.
Sí, Claudia.
Valentina ya tiene el modo intérprete. Por favor, que nadie ingrese a la configuración, por favor, porque ya quedó lista. Entonces, desde ahora ya podrían ingresar al botón más, idioma y voz, interpretación lingüística y activar el en español o lenguaje de origen para que puedan escuchar la charla en el idioma que corresponde.
Ok, gracias Claudia por arreglar la configuración y también por las instrucciones, porque nos va a poder ayudar a llevar la charla de una mejor manera y todos puedan escuchar la charla magistral que ha preparado el Dr. Moore. Dr. Moore, I will be passing on the speech, so I would appreciate if you can start from the beginning in order the audience to know all the information that you already said at the beginning.
Right.
Thank you very much for your
Valen
understanding.
Is Valentina working now okay?
Yes, Valentina?
Sí,
Okay,
ya está habilitado.
she's in the interpreting mode, Dr. Moore.
And it's functioning, it's working now.
Yes.
Okay.
So I will be passing on the speech. Thank you very much.
What do you mean you're passing on?
You can start speaking.
All right, okay. Okay, from the top, first I am thanking the Autonomous University of Chile for including me in the celebration of the opening of your professional training program. There is a movement around the world of universities setting up programs to train their faculty. And we congratulate you who are about to begin the course. I think it's in a few weeks' time, and your university for being among the leaders in this movement towards professional training of educators in higher education. I've for many years thought it rather unsatisfactory that while training is needed in every profession, it is not needed among teachers in higher education. It is a good development now that more universities are developing programs like yours. What brought the need to their attention, I think, was the experience during the COVID epidemic, when many attempted to teach at a distance using digital technology and found it was much more difficult than they anticipated. I've often said that using a technology magnifies the quality of teaching. If it's very good teaching, it looks very good when it comes through a camera, a microphone, or in other media. When it's not good teaching, when it comes through a microphone, technology, or other media, it becomes very obvious. I think that's partly what's brought attention to the need for more professional development in higher education. So today we're going to be thinking about digital technology, but the focus is on teaching. We are not technologists. We're dependent on the technologists to make our communications work, as is obvious at this moment. We are teachers who rely on the technologists to work for us. And I want to also add in this beginning that I know there are visitors joining the webinar, but I am speaking at the invitation of the university, the Autonomous University of Chile, and I'm speaking to people who I understand have very little experience of teaching at a distance. So I'm speaking in a very introductory way. Basic principles. Some of you might have read about transactional distance and educational theories that I've been associated with for many years. I'm not talking about theory today. I'm talking about very simple basic principles to people who I understand are at the beginning of a program of training. After I've made my remarks, we will have time for questions, and I hope questions will become discussion or conversation. I am as interested to hear your opinions as you might be to hear mine when you ask a question. So we can come to more sophisticated matters perhaps a little later on. But right now, I'm looking at the basics of teaching in using digital technologies. So the outline of our talk, very briefly, I'll mention what we understand by digital technology, and then what we understand by being a student and being a teacher, comparing a little bit of the old or analog teaching and the more modern digital view. The emphasis of my thinking, as you might know if you know me, is that a digital teacher uses a systems approach to all his or her teaching. The textbook that I worked on a few years ago, which went into 4 editions, is called Distance Education, a Systems Approach. I confess it needs updating. I know it needs updating. I promise it will get updated. Not right now. Digital systems teaching welcomes the more modern pedagogies known generally as constructivist and personalized. So I'll talk a little bit about collaborative learning and personal learning. That leads us to thinking about blended learning. And that leads us to the big question about school reform and the need for developing in our institutions a change in the concept of teaching from a one-person craft to a post-industrial digital age team approach to teaching. And then finally, I'll remind us about the importance of and some directions for continuing professional education. Digital technology, including a wide variety of devices and resources. They're changing every day, as we know. I have here today's copy of the Economist magazine, and the front page is about artificial intelligence. Last week, they had a supplement about games, online game playing. So it's every day's news, the changing in the digital technologies. The foundation, of course, is the internet, the key component of digital technology, mobile learning, social media platforms, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, virtual and augmented reality technologies. I looked up the statistic for Chile. Just about everybody in Chile is an internet user, according to this link from the World Statistics. And incredibly, it seems to me, just about everybody in Chile is also using Facebook. I wonder if that statistic is entirely correct, but certainly I understand that in your country, people are very well integrated into the digital technologies. And they have and continue to change our world in the way we do business with e-commerce and online marketing and remote work, entertainment with streaming services for music and movies, healthcare with telemedicine, accessing news now through social media as much as through broadcast and cable as it would have been 10, 20 years ago. So why digital technology for teaching? Two main reasons why we have no alternative. We have to become comfortable, competent with the digital technologies. Firstly, it gives an almost infinite store of information. The search engines, Google, Bing, Yahoo, and of course everybody today is talking about ChatGPT. The last big wave of digital technology, the social media platforms, the online encyclopedias, online forums, and the online news sources, an infinite store of access to information. And then the second reason is that now online users make content, online users create content. So when we're thinking about our teaching in the digital age, we have to be taking into account, how do we teach when our students don't need us to give them information? There is an infinite store of information. And how do we teach, taking into account the reality that our students are accustomed to creating their own content, whether it's in their blogs or in their videos they make with YouTube or TikTok. And that incredibly, something like half the United States population are in some kinds of gaming, especially young people. And why is it important? Well, the modern economy is based on knowledge. And that means having information and the ability to use it. Yes.
Sorry for interrupting you. And would you mind to pass your slides on, because we're in slide number 1?
Well, I have done that. Thank you for telling me, but I have done it.
Okay. And we're moving them. So you are talking on slide number 3, number 4.
I've now moved to 5. I can go back to 2 if you want.
No, it's fine. Now we can see number 5.
So I'm saying, why is learning through digital technology important? Okay. All right. Our economies are based on knowledge. There's an infinite amount of information. Knowing how to access the appropriate information and manage it is essential to working, certainly in the best paying jobs and the fastest growing jobs in the, what many people call the information economy. This is best acquired by learning through digital technologies. However, modern information has a short half-life. For example, in the past, what a medical doctor learned in college lasted, well, half of what he knew was out of date in 20 years. Half of what he knew was out of date in 20 years. Today, half of what he knows is out of date in 2 years. The half-life of medical knowledge is just 2 to 3 years. In the modern world, it's essential to keep learning. And that means distance education, learning through technology, learning wherever you are, whenever you want, from teachers anywhere. And that, of course, means using the digital technologies. So what was the old view, the analog view of being a student and being a teacher? A student was a person receiving knowledge. A doctor back then, 20 years ago, got enough knowledge to last for at least 20 years. They got the knowledge from teachers and books and other resources in a classroom. The teacher was the person with the knowledge. Before you could go online to an infinite amount of knowledge, you could go to the library. If you could get to a library, I worked for 7 years in Africa, you couldn't even get to a library. So you depended on the teacher, the person having the knowledge, to communicate the knowledge in a classroom. Here is a student online with a digital view of being a student. He's at home sitting at a computer. He has signed on to the learning management system on his school website. He's finished reviewing the learning objectives in his study guide online for this week. He's opening the reading in text, perhaps online also. Later, he's going to listen to a podcast from the same author who wrote the book. He's going to watch a high-quality National Geographic magazine film on YouTube. Tomorrow, he's going to link with some other students on Zoom for a discussion. He's scheduled a meeting on FaceTime with a teacher. Next day, he's going to the forest to look for specimens needed to fulfill his weekly project. Then he's going to go to a local school to take part in a laboratory experiment. And at the weekend, he'll write his weekly test assignment that will include a video that he made in the forest. And he'll submit that for evaluation on the course website after reviewing the feedback that he received on his last assignment from an instructor. So this is digital distance education. It's a long way from the analog version that I showed a moment ago. So what's a digital teacher? The digital teacher uses a systems approach, deconstructing the teaching into its components and designing each to build on each other, preparing the learning objectives, selecting the reading, preparing or selecting the podcast, preparing or selecting the film, planning and then conducting the discussion on Zoom, advising the student, planning the projects, we'll come to that again in a moment, but the projects that are central to a constructivist view of learning, planning and supervising that face-to-face component of the lesson that I referred to a minute ago. Reading each weekly assignment, reviewing the products that came from the field work, and evaluating each student's performance against the learning objectives. The learning objective says exactly what the student should be able to do at the end of the lesson. And so the evaluation depends on clear statement of that objective, and then measurement by the teacher of the extent to which the objective had been achieved, and giving feedback on that to the student. If the students have not achieved those objectives, the teacher has to modify the syllabus, that is what he's trying to teach, and the method he's used to deal with the inadequacy, the failure, which is the teaching failure, not the student's failure, failure of the teaching. When the COVID virus was on, I was asked to give some advice. So I wrote what I call tips, some tips for teaching with a systems approach. We're still thinking of the individual teacher in the classroom. What does he or she do when he's not able to be in that classroom? My first advice was, don't rely on spontaneity and improvisation. Do not rely on spontaneity and improvisation. Every classroom teacher does this. They see some feedback from people in the class, perhaps a sign of excitement, perhaps a sign of boredom, or some other sign. And then they adjust what they do to respond to those signals. And perhaps they depart from any plan they had. That's what I mean by the improvisation. You cannot go into a digital classroom online and rely on spontaneity and improvisation. You simply cannot do that. It will be a disaster. It will collapse. So you have to have a very good structure for the lesson as well as for the course, for every lesson. I suggest, and this is, you can have your own opinion, you may make adjustments on this advice, but I suggest certainly plan the lesson in chunks of time. I think perhaps 4 sessions of 15 minutes, but it depends, of course, on the age and sophistication of the students. So it may be more for some or less for others. But in designing the lesson, I think you have to design it in chunks of time. And the central to the whole project is designing the learning objectives. The action that the students should be able to perform at the end of the sequence of teaching, the conditions under which they perform it, and very importantly, the extent to which they perform it. If the person is expected to answer 100%, then if she answers 80%, there has to be remedial work. But if the objective is 80% and she answers 80%, she's achieved the objective and you have been successful in your teaching. So the learning objectives are very central to the systems approach. There is such a vast range of resources. We touched on them earlier. How do you know what resource is suitable for your lesson? It depends on the objective. If the objective is to be able to recognize 3 forms of mushroom in the forest, then the best resource, I suppose, is to go into a forest and practice collecting mushrooms. Maybe the best resource is a video that explains the appearance of the mushrooms. But probably reading an probably reading Chat GPT isn't a good resource for being able to recognize the different color of mushrooms, not as that resource is currently operating. So you cannot begin your digital teaching with a technology. You can only begin with an objective and then look for the technology that's appropriate for that objective. I think it's a little unwise, especially with younger children, younger students, to have addressing a camera for too long. You might feel today is too long. Perhaps more mature students can be comfortable with an hour or maybe even half an hour, but certainly you have to know the population and make a judgment with regard to how long you can speak into the camera like I'm doing today. Teachers tend to do too much. Teachers, because they're accustomed to standing in a lecture room and speaking for 40 minutes in a lecture room, they think they can do that to the camera. And I think that's unwise. You should limit, even if you limit to 15 minutes and then an activity and another 15 minutes, I would recommend that structure and avoid the very long lecture, which is okay, perhaps in a lecture room, although that's debatable. There must be student activities. The student activities are to achieve the objectives. Idle chatting and socializing is good outside class, but not in the classroom. Then the evaluation tasks I've already mentioned, and then the remedial activities for each student, or repeat the lesson if many of the students have not achieved the objectives, or change the objectives. That's okay. If you don't know what I'm talking about, if you don't really understand this point about objectives, I strongly recommend you can go back to an old book that was around by Robert Mager, M-A-G-E-R. The famous publication is Bloom's Taxonomy of different objectives at different levels of sophistication. But being able to write good learning objectives is central to being a good teacher, online or face-to-face. But face-to-face, as I said before, you can improvise. Online, it's got to be structured. Fortunately, learning management systems are very helpful. Today, you don't have to do all that work yourself. At my university, we used Canvas. When I started teaching my courses in distance education, it was on Canvas. Before that was on Blackboard. And then I think there was something else. Was it called Angel? And I've shown some images here of learning management systems published by the bookseller. I don't know if you have them in Chile, in the American bookseller Barnes & Noble. And you can see on that image, perhaps if you can read it, the basic principles of good systems teaching have been adopted and made standard in the learning management system, such as the chunking of the content into units and modules, the statements of goals and objectives, the testing of performance, remedial resources. So the learning management system can go a long way towards helping in following those systems principles that I've been talking about. Now, systems in the old days, analog teaching, the basic theory of teaching was that it was a process of communication, and it was done in a class. In the digital age, thinking about teaching has shifted, and now the emphasis is on engaging learners in constructing rather than receiving knowledge. Using digital technologies to connect the individuals in virtual groups to share in the knowledge creating process. So digital teachers or teaching in the digital age requires using methods such as case-based learning, development of cases for the students to engage in problem solving, project-based learning, where students work in groups, virtual groups, to solve authentic problems in real-life contexts, requiring usually the learner to collaborate with others to complete the learning task. Now, Steve Jobs, the CEO of Apple, is quoted as saying that in the digital economy, it is essential to know how to work collaboratively, to work in teams. And that's something that is acquired in good teaching that uses digital technology, because it teaches people to learn through collaborative projects. That's a collective, that's the group. Distance education used to be called independent learning, and the focus has always been on the importance of individualized or personalized learning. And that's now back at the center of our theory and practice as a result of the facilities provided by digital technologies. By contrast with the group-centered pedagogy, we have personalized pedagogy. UNESCO's definition, customized learning to each individual's strength and interest. And of course, on the horizon now, we have the promise of using learning analytics artificial intelligence, using machines to analyze each student's prior experience, performance, strengths and weaknesses, based on, for example, how often they log in, when they post to discussion boards, problems they have with collaborative learning tasks, as well as their own learner characteristics, such as personality differences. When I wrote my own dissertation, God, 60 years, 1972, about 50 years ago, I was intrigued by the phenomenon of personality differences, and still am. What makes people interact with content or with each other in different ways as a function emerging from the kind of person they are. Well, the new technologies will make it much easier than it ever has been to be able to identify learner characteristics, also their social conditions, and probably in the future, information gathered in fields such as neurosciences and neuropsychology. So it's anticipated that the machines will be able to run billions of tiny permutations to find the best fit for each individual student, one that no human teacher could possibly come up with. Then the learning objectives for a student will be relevant to the specific needs and competence of that individual, linking each student to the resources most suitable to that individual, as well as managing interlearner projects and so on. There are some early examples of this, and some of you may know, more recent than I do, but I've been aware of MindSpark is a company in India that draws on a bank of something like 45,000 questions and 2 million answers that are generated each day to provide a vast store of potential responses to any particular individual. And in Brazil, I'm told there's a program used in Sao Paulo by nearly 500,000 pupils called Geeky. I haven't had personal experience of those, but that's what I've heard about. Now, there's no conflict between this personalized, self-directed learning and collaborative, but on the contrary, the optimum environment for learning is the one that provides the best experiences of both those, independent learning and social learning. And so what we're looking for now is a version of what's been talked about in schools for the last 10 years, known as blended learning, or some people talk about flipped learning. Blended learning combines personal and collaborative learning. Here the student is using the learning management system, the video talks, the podcast books, and other texts, YouTube, MOOCs. We don't hear so much about MOOCs as we did 5 or 10 years ago. Joining a digital discussion group, and a face-to-face classroom group. The classroom, I want to repeat what I've said so many times, is, or other presential group, is one of the resources in the teacher's toolbox. It's just another communication medium. It's an expensive medium because of teacher time and student time and school facilities. And it should be used only when it's the most efficient medium for accomplishing defined learning objectives. If the learning objective can be accomplished by a podcast, why do we have the expense of bringing people in on a bus or driving or walking to a school when it can be more efficiently done in the less costly way? The problem in the past has been that it's assumed that the class is the essential technology, but then adding on others, adding a camera to a classroom is crazy. The camera can do some things, the classroom can do some things. You have to have the structure in the system based on the learning objective to decide when to use the camera and when to use the classroom. So we have blended digital learning. Students have to learn new skills, searching for information, and this is really important, sorting and sifting. I hope you can translate that. And evaluating information. People are talking about ChatGPT. I've tried it as you have. Some of what comes back is very useful. It gets some information very quickly, much quicker than the way I would have had to do it before. But I am able to judge. Some of it is no good at all, not helpful at all. Some of it is wrong. And I have the ability to sort through that information and evaluate it. This is something that our students will require more than ever, and something that we have to help them learn. And of course, they will develop skills of synthesizing, putting together different pieces of information. And as I've said several times, they have to develop the skill of collaborating in creating knowledge. I've said several times, creating knowledge together. I didn't emphasize the skill of doing that. Very few people, how many of you have been in faculty meetings? You know how unskilled we all are in focused, creative team working, how easily conversations get off down side tracks, arguments occur, we lose sight of what the task is. We've not been trained our educational system has not done a good job in teaching us how to collaborate in creating knowledge. The teachers have to develop skills in guiding the students in the searching and sifting process. Teachers can help summarize and link together ideas because the process is creating knowledge. Knowledge does not exist outside the person. What exists outside is information. Knowledge is what people make with that information. And often that will vary from person to person, to some extent, again, depending on the person's personality characteristics. But linking the ideas together is something the teacher should be more competent at than the student. And as you're going on with your professional development in the program, I think there's something very much to keep in mind as to what you have to do and to practice being with students and helping them in creating the knowledge by bringing together, linking their ideas. Arranging and managing the collaboration, interacting and adapting to individual learners. Now, this seems unfair to teachers. I'm asking a lot. How can you do the study guide, do the learning objectives, prepare the podcast, manage the constructivist group activities, evaluate every student, provide the remedial support, and continue your professional development? I know, look at the poor man there in the image. It's asking too much. And please do the best you can. Be aware of these steps in the systems method, the systems approach. Look at what I've said and do the best you can. But now I want to close, to move towards the end of my talk, by saying we need to change the system. We have to change our institutions from the administrative and budget monetary systems that support analog teaching into systems that support digital teaching using organizational methods that are used in every other consumer service, especially division of labor. We have to move towards teaching as a team process. This is not a new idea. It's an idea that's been rejected by most institutions or taken up in a very cautious and defensive way. But the schools and universities are still organized very much like they were in the 20th century, very much like they were even in the 19th century. And teaching is still a craft, which has to be changed into a system. And teaching has to become a team process. The photograph you see there was my mentor in Madison, Wisconsin, who in the 1960s experimented with this concept. He said, if the automobile can be constructed by people working in teams, why can we not break down teaching into different components and have experts on each component so that the product will be better than any one person can do alone? And that's the basic concept, that somebody decides the content, somebody does the instructional design, somebody is the video expert, somebody the text expert, somebody the online web designer. Somebody else is an evaluator. Somebody else acts what we'll call as a tutor, what the traditional role of a teacher, to conduct group interactions, and other support are provided by specialist counselors and tech support and librarians. This has been done. Several Well, it began when this man was taken over to Great Britain and they set up what they called the Open University, which you might know, it's the largest university in Great Britain with over 100,000 students, and they have no campus and no classrooms. No campus, no classrooms. And if you noticed in the last week or so when there's been someone on my television, not yours perhaps, who was talking about space exploration to Pluto, and then somebody else was talking about the phenomenon of of the southern lights or the northern lights. These experts were faculty, they were content specialists at the Open University, which has no campus, no classroom. They only teach through digital technology, and it works. So this is not a theory. It's not a fantasy. The concept of the course team, because in those institutions, all courses are designed by teams. I worked on one many years ago. I think we had something like 20 different people in the team that designed and developed the course. That has resource implications. The flag at the bottom is the flag of the Republic of South Africa. When I was a consultant there for a project they called the Telematics Initiative. Telematics was the term that was being used before we talked about digital technology. And they developed a policy, because at that time the new government was about to come into power and there was opportunity for some important reforms in the educational system. So they developed a policy for integrating digital technology into their higher education. And what they recognized was that it required a different organization of their people, that instead of having permanent positions and vertical divisions and hierarchical relationships in traditional colleges, they had to build teams for specific projects. So that one group of people would work on a project in, let's say, introduction to mathematics. And then another team would work on another project in intermediate mathematics. And some of the people in the first team would be in the second team. But some of the people in the first team would move off to do a different course. And so there's a greater flexibility. And if any administrators are listening to this, I hope we can talk about it, because you have the people, but they're locked into a traditional structure, which is hierarchical, and divisions that prevent resources, human resources, moving across as from project to project. And that has effects on funding. Particularly, one important aspect of this is that designing programs and teaching with digital technology requires more front-end investment than traditional teaching. So in traditional teaching, you tend to have budgets that last about a year. Sometimes some colleges at the end of a year are trying to spend their money. Have you had that experience? I've seen it. Because at the end of the year, the budget closes and starts over again. But good digital courses continue more than a year. And there's heavy investment in the designing at the beginning in order to get the quality, and then it can be used for more than 1 year. So that needs some important changes in the administration and management of the institution. I hope we might get a chance to talk about that in the future. So finally, I'll just remind everybody, again, congratulations, you're coming into a program of professional continuing education. Well done, well done. Continue. You can keep up to date with research. I have to recommend our own journal. We've been publishing for 37 years. We publish one article in every issue in Spanish, but you don't have to subscribe to an issue. You can go online and read the Spanish language articles. And please research and send me your research so that we can publish your research in Spanish for Spanish reading colleagues. The American Journal of Distance Education. The handbooks of distance education I've edited. We have had 4 such handbooks. Conferences. At the University of Wisconsin in Madison, if any of you are fortunate enough to get some travel money, there's a conference I helped establish back in 1987 or 6. It's now in its, 40-something years. It's a very good conference on distance teaching and learning. United States Distance Learning Association. It's a little heavy on technology. Distance Teaching and Learning Conference is more heavy on the kind of issues I've been talking about, the pedagogy. The ICDE is the world body, the International Council for Distance Education, which is having, it has conferences every 2 years. It's having its next world conference in Costa Rica, which isn't so far for many of you. I might even get there. If so, perhaps we could do something together. Maybe we could do something together. And CREAD, I was involved in the creation of CREAD back in the 1990s, which is the Spanish-speaking consortium of distance teaching institutions throughout the whole of Latin America. And if you're going to choose any one conference, I suppose I should recommend that you get in touch with the folks at CREAD. I've also mentioned there EDEN, the European Distance Education Network. You can read their documents. Probably going to Europe is not realistic for attending a conference. Thank you. I hope what I've said is of interest. I'd be glad if we have enough time. I've talked for a little longer perhaps, but we had a delayed start, so I haven't talked for too long. I'd like to thank the folks that you see on the screen for making this work. The 2 images, one, I'm getting the degree from Athabasca, which I think was mentioned in the introduction. Athabasca is, I think, the finest distance teaching university in North America. The other picture is when I was doing a lot of work in Brazil, and a group of young people, well, we danced together. And for some reason, when I was putting the slide, that came up and I couldn't resist sharing it with you. So thank you very much.
Bueno, en nombre del Centro de Innovación y Desarrollo Docente, DOCENTIA, queremos agradecer enormemente la presentación del doctor Michael Graham Moore, que, como hemos podido ver durante su presentación, ha contribuido enormemente al campo de la educación a distancia, que ahora conocemos como educación en línea. Así que muchas gracias, doctor Moore, por su presentación. Esperamos poder seguir trabajando de forma colaborativa con usted, no solamente desde el centro, sino también desde la universidad. También queremos agradecer a Valentina Góngora, la intérprete, que hizo posible la traducción al español de esta sesión. Muchas gracias, Valentina. Y a Mildred Olave, quien fue la intérprete de lengua de señas. Muchas gracias a ambas. Bueno, ahora vamos a dar paso a la sesión de preguntas y respuestas y me gustaría saber si ya estamos en el modo consecutivo.
Hola María José, sí. Deberían
Ok.
poder escucharme todos los asistentes.
Por favor, nos confirman si pueden escuchar a Valentina Góngora, nuestra intérprete, para poder iniciar la sesión de 10 minutos de preguntas y respuestas. Muchas gracias. Bueno, la primera pregunta que tenemos acá en el chat es, Patricia Ibáñez nos pregunta, ¿cómo se puede trabajar con la resistencia de algunos docentes que trabajan más desde la pedagogía tradicional a la educación online? Si hay algún tipo de consejo que nos pueda entregar para sumarlo a este desafío.
The first question is from Patricia Ibáñez, and she's asking, what can we do with those professors, those teachers that feel a little reluctant to leave that traditional education?
While I think about that, let me ask, where is Patricia?
Patricia es la directora del Centro de Innovación Docente.
Patricia is the
Ella está-
director of the Center of Innovation.
Oh, you
For
mean
teachers.
here? You're Patricia here. Oh, what to do with people who are reluctant? There's an old theory that you might possibly remember, maybe not, about adoption and diffusion of new practices. Everett, you can find a book if you want to go back to analog technology. Everett Rogers, Lionberger and Rogers, anyway, are the people who developed a theory of adoption and diffusion of new practices. The basic principle is to first identify one or more people who can be described as innovators. Translate that, then I'll say a bit more.
Bueno, existe una antigua teoría que quizás recuerden, llamada la adopción y la difusión de las nuevas prácticas. Ellos hablaban sobre la enseñanza análoga, me parece, y no sé si lo recuerdo bien, pero el nombre de los autores es Lionberger y Roger. Ellos tienen ciertos principios básicos, y voy a comenzar con el primero, que tiene que ver con identificar a personas que están dispuestas a innovar, identificar a una o más personas.
Okay, my experience in attempting to introduce innovation everywhere around the world is you cannot persuade everybody to make a change. You have to identify the small number of people who will be innovators. Say that and then I have more.
Bueno, en mi experiencia, es difícil introducir la innovación en el mundo, pero es importante hacerlo. Y no es necesario tratar de convencer a todo el mundo. Como bien decía, es importante identificar a aquellas personas que se muestran dispuestas a hacerlo.
I also recommend do not try to introduce an innovative program for everybody or for a whole institution, but always introduce one demonstration or pilot. Introduce a small program first, then I have to say more.
Lo que también recomiendo es no intentar introducir un programa y aplicarlo para todos, sino que comenzar con una demo, con un programa piloto.
When you find when you have a small project and it becomes successful, it must be successful. You must make it work. But you do a small project and make it work, then others who are not early adopters will come they will come when the innovative project succeeds. Okay?
Entonces, cuando ya tengan establecido este pequeño proyecto y ya haya tenido éxito, lo importante es que sea exitoso, verán que quienes en un comienzo no se adaptaban comenzarán a acercarse a ustedes.
So at your institution, I would not call everyone together and try to persuade them to move in a new direction, but I would try to find those people who you expect to be innovative and do something with them. Then that will demonstrate and will get more followers later.
Así que para cuando lo hagan, no intentaré, o cuando ya tengan este proyecto, no intenten convencer a todos, sino que a los que les parezcan personas que vayan a ser más innovadoras.
I know this works. I know this is the only approach to getting change as I describe it.
Y sé que funciona, sé que es el formato para llevar a cabo los cambios.
One other very important point, though, you cannot get change from the bottom upwards. There must be leadership from the top down.
Y otro punto importante, no es posible llevar a cabo el cambio de abajo hacia arriba. Es importante tener a buenos líderes que realicen este cambio de arriba hacia abajo.
Everywhere in the world where there has been really successful innovation of technologies into education, there has always been a top leadership. Of course, eventually eventually others must accept this, but major reform doesn't come only from below. There has to be top leadership. So if you're the director of a center, you are critical to getting the change, but I would not try to persuade everybody. I would look for those who will, you think, be open to change, innovation, work with them, and then later other people will be attracted.
Bueno, y existen en todo el mundo ejemplos de innovaciones exitosas, pero en cada uno de ellos es el liderazgo la parte más significativa e importante de estos procesos. Como le decía, eventualmente otras personas van a aceptarlo, así que si usted, quien hizo la pregunta, es la directora del centro, su rol será vital. No intente convencer a todos, luego llegarán.
Excellent question. Thank you.
Muy buena pregunta, gracias.
Do we have time for one more?
Tenemos una pregunta pendiente. La educación virtual, resultado del constante y dinámico cambio para el mundo, tanto de los nativos digitales como de aquellos que son nómadas en este sentido, estas nuevas oportunidades de aprendizaje y enseñanza de aprendizaje permitirán el aumento del conocimiento desde la innovación.
We have another question, which is virtual education is the constant result of dynamic change for the world, for those native digitals like those who are nomads. So in this sense, these new opportunities of learning and teaching will allow an increase in the knowledge from the innovation.
Sorry, can you say it again and say it more slowly? I don't understand the question.
Okay.
More slowly.
Voy a repetir la pregunta más lento. So virtual education, it is the constant and dynamic, it is the result of the constant and the dynamic change for the world.
Valentina, slower, please.
Okay. So virtual education is the result of the constant and dynamic change of the world, from those who are native digitals as those who are nomads. So in that sense, with these new opportunities of learning and teaching, this will allow an increase in knowledge from the innovation.
Question is not clear.
It's more of a comment.
Here we have the question, and acá tenemos la pregunta, perdón, nuevamente, pero planteada desde otro punto de vista. Mi pregunta es, ¿esta nueva modalidad de aprendizaje y enseñanza creará personas más independientes ante la entrega y la recepción del conocimiento? ¿Generará aislamiento social, como ha ocurrido en culturas altamente tecnologizadas, como por ejemplo en Corea?
Okay, so will this new modality will that create more independent people? Will that create more social isolation as it has happened in cultures or countries such as Korea?
Your
Mr.
mic is off. On.
Dr. Moore, you are muted.
Dr. Moore.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yes.
can hear you now.
Right. Did the previous person have a question?
Yeah,
Or
it's the same person. She made the question differently. She
okay.
changed it. Yes.
Good, good. So
For some reason, sir, you are muted. We could listen to you, but now you're muted again. I don't know what happened. For some reason, you're muted again.
all right. Say the
There you
question
are.
again. Say the
Okay,
question
so
again.
the question is, in this new modality of learning and teaching, I'm sorry, give me just one. Okay, there you are. There it is. So in this new modality of learning and teaching, will this new way of doing things make people more independent when delivering and receiving knowledge? Will that create some social isolation as it has happened in highly technology cultures such as Korea?
Okay, I understand now. I think I understand the question. It's a good question. Social isolation, if as educators, it is our intention to deal with social isolation, we have the power, the resources, the knowledge to establish educational programs that lead to social integration.
Muy buena pregunta. Yes, go ahead.
Or say that, go ahead, yeah.
Muy buena pregunta. El aislamiento social, para nosotros como educadores, deberá estar dentro de nuestras intenciones el poder resolverlo. Y esto lo podemos hacer a la hora de establecer estos programas educativos.
It's a very interesting question. The person asking the question is confusing the process of education, teaching and learning, with the objective of social integration. I repeat, if there is an objective of social integration, we should design a program, an educational program, with those objectives. I'll stop there and come back.
Bueno, como bien dije anteriormente, la pregunta es interesante y me parece que quien preguntó confundió un poco el proceso de educación, enseñanza y aprendizaje. Todo tiene que ver con el objetivo y si el objetivo que nos proponemos es que haya esa interacción social, entonces el objetivo de nuestro programa deberá estar enfocado en aquello.
You see, the questioner is there's a confusion. There's an assumption that when people go into a learning environment, let us say they go to learn about the mushrooms in the forest, that learning about mushrooms in the forest should be beneficial for social integration. But the educational program has its specific objectives. If someone is to learn to fly an aeroplane, flying an aeroplane should not be confused with social integration. If social integration is the objective, we design a program for social integration, and it's different from flying an aeroplane.
Bueno, y creo que hay una confusión, ¿no? Existe por ejemplo, si tenemos esta idea de enseñarles a los estudiantes a reconocer, como dije en la presentación, distintos tipos de callampas. Nuestro objetivo va a ser únicamente ese y no el de generar la integración social, ¿no? Otro ejemplo que puedo dar es que si alguien quiere aprender a manejar un avión, va a ser distinto el objetivo de aprendizaje, el de llevar a cabo la integración social. No sé si me explico.
It's a wonderful question. It's an excellent question. It does reflect a certain assumption, shall I say, that just being there in the educational environment is just necessarily going to make for good social integration, just being there. But that's not good enough.
Bueno, es una maravillosa y excelente pregunta y nos permite reflexionar sobre esta idea de que simplemente por estar en ese ambiente de educación vamos a desarrollar esta integración social, ¿no? Y no es necesariamente así.
It even makes for inefficient social integration because no teacher in that classroom has clear objective, expectation, vision of what it is that the students will have acquired or have learned towards social integration. The teacher is teaching mushrooms or mathematics and hoping that there will be social integration. But it's confused. Do you see what I'm saying?
Entonces, puede incluso parecer ineficiente este concepto de la integración social, porque los profesores en general tienen esta expectativa o esta visión de que los estudiantes adquieran el conocimiento que ellos están impartiendo, y en este caso, como dijimos, puede ser el aprendizaje sobre las callampas o la matemática, y en ese proceso el profesor espera que exista esta interacción social.
Where is this person who is asking the question?
¿Y quién hace esta pregunta? ¿Dónde está esta persona que hace la pregunta?
La pregunta la hace el profesor Chacón. Es un académico.
Professor is made by Professor Chacón. He's from Chile. He's a psychologist.
Chacon? Oh, well. He's asking some questions and he knows a lot about this.
Bueno, y la pregunta que hace, me doy cuenta que él sabe mucho al respecto.
But if I were there, I would say, tell me now, what is the evidence that the people in this group have social integration? And when you tell me what you expect to see, I would then make those into objectives. Then I would look for how to accomplish those objectives. And we would have an efficient program for social integration. It's a different program than if you asked me to help you develop a mathematics program for first-year undergraduate students. I think I made the point.
Bueno, y como si estuviera ahí, les diría cuál es la evidencia, por ejemplo, para todos los que estamos presentes aquí, de que durante estas charlas se haya generado esta integración social. Si estuviera allí, podría trabajar con ustedes en el objetivo de cómo lograrlo y establecer que nuestro objetivo es la integración social y probablemente podríamos llegar a crear un muy buen programa para llevarlo a cabo. Pero si el objetivo es enseñar matemáticas, entonces será muy distinto. Espero y creo que mi punto quedó claro.
Give my greetings to Fernando.
Y saludos a Fernando.
Another pregunta. Más pregunta.
Bueno, tenemos una pregunta de Rodolfo Magno Recabarren y nos pregunta, primero que nada dice gracias por su presentación. Tiene una consulta. En su opinión, ¿cuáles son las tecnologías digitales más costo efectivas? Ejemplo, realidad virtual, realidad aumentada, sistemas de gestión de aprendizaje.
Okay, so this question comes from Rodolfo, and he says, thank you for your presentation. I have a question. In your opinion, what are the most cost-effective digital technologies to educate? Example, virtual reality, augmented reality, or LMS.
Virtual reality, you said?
Virtual reality, augmented reality, and systems of learning management.
Slowly. Augmented reality, and what was the next one?
Systems of learning management, and he provides the LMS acronym.
So you're asking to choose between virtual reality, augmented reality, and learning management system?
No, he's asking what is the most cost-effective digital technologies to educate? What is the most cost-effective? And he gives examples of different technologies, for different technologies. But what
so
do
he's
you
not
consider
asking me
is the most cost-effective one?
which is the most cost-effective. But before I say anything else, let me say that there's no one technology. We might decide on an answer to that question of which is the more cost-effective. But the answer to that question is always going to be, it depends. It depends. What is cost effective if there are 2 students is different from 200 students. So before I can answer what is the more cost effective, I must know what the program is. Say that.
Ok, antes que nada, quiero dejar en claro que no hay solo una tecnología para escoger. Quizás, si nos ponemos a debatir, podamos llegar a una que sea la más costo efectiva. Sin embargo, la respuesta siempre va a ser que va a depender. Va a depender si, por ejemplo, en mi sala o para mis estudiantes voy a enseñar solo para 2 estudiantes, voy a hacer una clase para 100 estudiantes y es muy necesario primero tener ese contexto para poder decidir cuál será la más costo efectiva.
The answer to that must always be in a particular context. The context includes I already said how many, but who are the students? What is the subject? So for some students, some subject, the more cost-effective will be a different technology than for other students in another subject in another country. It depends.
Entonces, para darle una respuesta a esta pregunta, siempre va a ser necesario tener un contexto. ¿Cuántos estudiantes son? ¿Qué es lo que ya mencioné anteriormente? ¿Quiénes son estos estudiantes? ¿De qué tema voy a hablar en mis clases? ¿Cuál es mi materia? Y va a depender para qué tipo de estudiantes, puede variar, puede ser uno, puede ser otro, además puede depender de a qué país, en qué país voy a dar la clase o de dónde son los estudiantes.
This is very good. If I had one student who had a baccalaureate degree in English literature, and my objective was that that student would be able to write in 200 words an appreciation of Lady Macbeth in the Shakespeare play, the most cost-effective medium would probably be read the play, watch a video, and attend a performance. Be expensive, but for that one student, that might be the most cost-effective. If there were 100 students, it would be more cost-effective. So I'm only repeating myself, I think, Valentina. It depends on the students, the subject, the students and the subject. It depends. I think one more question. I'm afraid I have a dinner appointment at 6 o'clock, so we can go for another 5 minutes perhaps, and then we must stop. Go ahead.
Por ahora, Valentina, no hay más preguntas en el chat y con esto
Ok.
estaríamos dando cierre a la
Perfecto.
sesión
Le
de hoy.
explicaré. Okay, so I will render this translation and we have no more questions.
Oh,
Okay. So, muy bien, sí. Por ejemplo, les doy el ejemplo. Si yo tengo un estudiante que está estudiando literatura inglesa y mi objetivo es que este estudiante escriba 200 palabras sobre su apreciación de la obra Lady Macbeth de Shakespeare, voy a hacer que ese estudiante, por ejemplo, lea la obra, vea un video respecto a la obra y vaya a ver la obra en vivo. Quizás puede ser caro, pero va a ser lo más costo efectivo. Ahora, si tengo a 100 estudiantes en esa clase, no va a ser igual de costo efectivo. Como bien dije, depende del estudiante y depende de la materia.
Muchas gracias por esta porción, esta sección de preguntas y respuestas. Hemos dejado el link en el chat para que puedan responder a la encuesta de satisfacción de este webinar. Agradecemos a Dr. Moore nuevamente por esta presentación, a Valentina Góngora y a Mildred Olave también por ayudarnos a hacer posible esta presentación y los esperamos a todos en los siguientes eventos que seguiremos planificando desde el Centro de Innovación y Desarrollo Docente.